why we explore Mars, the mysteries of the red planet, the history of water, the possibilities of life.
You learn something and then you design the next mission based on what you learn.
Has allowed us to literally go back in time on Mars.
The first picture will cover an area of 176 miles.
Mariner 4 began transmitting back images.
The first photograph that a human being has ever seen from the surface of another planet.
On August 20th, 1975, the first Viking spaceship was launched.
You are seeing something that no other human has ever seen before.
Former seas and mountains.
Huge canyons.
That sense of wonderment and achievement and always working towards your goal.
We can do, and we will do.
And liftoff.
Touchdown confirmed.
Mars is unavoidably special.
We've landed and we've scooped.
We've roved, we've orbited.
Together we did it, but the attitude was together we can do it.
The future is what you make out of it. You can make it real.
And here we are with Mars Perseverance, 51 years later, getting ready to do the first ever Mars return mission.
Eventually, we can bring those samples back to Earth and determine for the very first time, did life exist on Mars?
Hello, and welcome to Kennedy Space Center. My name is Bettina and Claude. Thank you for joining us for this pre-launch press conference. Moments ago, the launch readiness review concluded for the Mars 2020 mission, which will carry the Mars Perseverance Rover and the Ingenuity helicopter to the Red Planet. We're very excited about this new era in Mars exploration. You can catch the launch here on NASA television with broadcast starting at 7 a.m. and the launch will start at 7:50 a.m. To learn more about this mission to Mars, we are joined by a great panel to tell us about Mars 2020 and future plans to Mars. First, we have NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine, Thomas Zurbuchen, Associate Administrator for NASA Science Mission Directorate, Matt Wallace, Deputy Program Manager for the Jet Propulsion Lab, Omar Bays, Launch Director for the NASA Launch Service Program, Tor Bruno, President and CEO of United Launch Alliance, and Jessica Williams, 45th Space Wing Weather Officer. As a reminder, we'll start taking questions from our media who is joining us virtually on the phone bridge. We'll also take questions from social media using the hashtag Countdown to Mars. So let's start with NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine.
Well, thank you so much, Bettina. And I just want to say the launch readiness review is complete, and we are indeed go for launch. I want to thank our ULA teammates and of course our JPL teammates as well. This has been an amazing team effort. And I remember when I first came to the agency, Thomas Zurbuchen came to me and said, hey, look, we have a risk here. The risk is Mars 2020. I said, well, what's the risk? He said, well, we might not go in 2020. And here we are, just a number of years later, but we are in fact going to launch what we now call Mars Perseverance in the year 2020. And I think the name is perfectly appropriate. A young man in Virginia named Alex Mather, a seventh grader, is the person who named it. And so we are in extraordinary times right now with the coronavirus pandemic, and yet we have in fact persevered, and we have protected this mission because it is so important. We declared this mission to be essential, and there's a number of reasons why. And I'll just give you a few of them, some of the reasons that excite me the most. First of all, you know, the president gave us an objective to go to Mars with humans, to plant an American flag on Mars. Well, in order to do that, we have to be able to sustain human life on Mars. So there's a mission on Perseverance called MOXIE. It's a technology demonstrator. How do we use the carbon dioxide atmosphere of Mars and create pure oxygen that we can use for life support? So that's a really exciting mission that is a precursor to an eventual human mission to Mars. But there's so much more. When we think about the Mars Perseverance rover, for the first time ever, we're going to fly a helicopter on another planet. We call it Ingenuity. And of course, Ingenuity is going to be a tech demonstrator for this particular mission, but in the future it could transform how we do planetary science on these other worlds, and eventually be a scout so that we can figure out where exactly do we need to send our robots. But I think the other thing that's very important about this mission, this is the first time in history when NASA has dedicated a mission to what we call astrobiology, the search for life, either maybe now, or ancient life on another world. And of course, when we go to the Jezreel Crater, which is obviously a big crater on Mars, but it's also a former lake bed, and it had a river that flowed into it, and that river delta is a place where we believe there could be, not saying there is, we don't know, but there could have been at one point in time life. We know that Mars had a very active atmosphere and a very active hydrosphere, that it was protected from the radiation of deep space at one time 3 billion years ago. In other words, Mars was at one time habitable. We know that because of past missions, Spirit and Opportunity. And now that we know what the history of Mars was, we can say, okay, maybe there was life there. Let's go find out if there was life on Mars. And in fact, the other exciting thing is we're going to cache samples. We're going to cache samples on the surface of another world for a future mission in 2026 to bring those samples back to Earth. And that will be the first time in history that we've done a Mars return mission. In fact, it's the first time in history we've done a return mission from any planet. So these are very, very exciting times. Very important mission for the United States of America, and of course a very, very important mission for the world. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to the Associate Administrator of the Science Mission Directorate at NASA, who has done just amazing work helping us get to where we are today, and somebody who understands how uniting this mission actually is. So Dr. Thomas Zurbuchen, over to you.
Thank you so much, Administrator, and thanks to you for your commitment to success, without which we wouldn't be here today. I really, really appreciate that. And I just couldn't be more happy to be here today and have this amazing mission on top of a rocket ready to go. And actually from this launch readiness review know that all the issues are addressed, and we are in fact ready now. We're just counting down and just really celebrating with the team. You already mentioned, Administrator, why we want to go to Mars, and I'm not going to repeat it. For me, the most exciting part is to really go land in this river delta that we think has so many promising landscapes, kind of rocks, that in fact we want to not only see images of and measurements of, we want to see back in the best labs that are available to humanity, which is of course on Earth, with Mars sample return being a reality. We're excited to go learn about the climate of Mars, the weather there, with unprecedented weather information that is right there also, and teaches us about that. And needless to say, we're going to make amazing, surprising discoveries, kind of in a way that it always happens. The most important thing that happens in these missions are the things we did not plan. Those are discoveries that are rewriting school books all over the world. Well, there are two things that really are important to me today I want to focus on. The first one is Perseverance. You already mentioned how appropriate this name is. Perseverance, many people think initially is about something hard. It is something beautiful. It's together with exploration, together with hope, together with vision. It is what actually allows us to achieve these amazing goals. And this mission is full of perseverance. It's perseverance early on even of bringing this amazing idea to bear and designing this exciting rover together with international partners that persevered themselves developing these instruments and sending them over. It is going through the adversity that we always encounter when it comes to complex exploration, but also in this case over and above because of the tremendous difficulties in the sample return technology that was invented at JPL and their collaborators. But then you talked about it, life changed. And on this rover we have the Unity plaque recognizing the first responders that also had an important role and actually kept everybody safe, not only the good people who worked at this rover and the launch vehicle, but also their friends and family all over the United States and, in fact, all over the world. In addition to that, on this rover is a plaque with 11 million names. And I want to tell you, my name is there, as are my entire family, and both of my parents who are no longer with us, they too are part of that important exploration. And I hope so many of the people who are watching right now, because we're going together as a world. And I want to give you a glimpse of going together as a world from a little country over there in Europe. And I want to show the first image. This is in the background there, the Matterhorn. You've seen it from chocolate bars, perhaps. You know it's one of the most amazing mountains, almost 15,000 feet high. And what you see in the forefront is a light show, actually, really onto the Matterhorn with Mars images. You see, of course, looking at these rocks as, well, this could be on another planet too. Well, this is in Switzerland. It's actually at 9,000 feet high. That's where the crew is right now. But here's what's exciting right now. Every night until the 15th of August, and next image, please. The crew is going to project images such as this one onto the Matterhorn, images of coming together as a world and persevering and exploring our neighboring planet together, but being explorers together and persevering. And so for me, that image is just really one of those demonstrations. No, this is not fake. That's exactly what happened last night. That's exactly what happened next night in Switzerland and for the next few nights. So I just really want to thank Jerry Hofstetter, the artist and event designer who did that, and of course Daniel Lucken, who is the official in charge who enabled that. There's a lot of people who had to agree to that moment of coming together. Ich kann nur sagen, wie froh dass ich bin, dass das dort ist. Und danke vielmals, Zermatt, für alles zusammen. Yes, that was Swiss German, and I do speak that language. With that, however, I'm going to turn it over to Matt, and I just want to tell you how much I appreciate Matt and his work and the work of his entire team. Matt and I got to know each other a lot because we too had to persevere together. Matt?
Thank you, Thomas. I'm not going to speak German, but I'm pretty excited. This is the 5th Mars rover mission I've had an opportunity to work on, and I have to say this one's really special for a lot of reasons, some of which you've already heard about. That we're doing transformative science. Really, for the first time, we're looking for signs of life on another planet. And as Thomas mentioned, for the first time, we're going to collect samples that'll be part of, we hope, the first sample return from another planet. And there's a lot of other firsts along the way. Administrator mentioned our first powered aerial capability with the Ingenuity helicopter. We're making oxygen on the surface of Mars for the first time. For the first time, we have an opportunity to use autonomous systems to avoid hazards as we land in Jezreel Crater, and that's a technology that'll feed forward into future robotic systems and human exploration systems, and that's exciting. We're also carrying microphones for the first time. We're going to hear the sounds of the spacecraft landing on another planet and the rover drilling in the rocks and rolling over the surface of Mars. And that's pretty exciting. And I'll mention one more, which is kind of near and dear to my heart. For the first time, we're going to have an opportunity to see our spacecraft land on another planet. We've got commercial ruggedized cameras that we've distributed essentially all over the spacecraft. And they'll get high-definition video that we'll bring back after we land on the surface of the entire landing activity, from the inflation of the parachute to the touchdown of the rover. And that's going to be some very exciting footage. So the whole mission is very exciting for me. If we bring up the first graphic, just from a quick historical perspective, we really began to look for ways to leverage the powerful sky crane delivery system that we developed to successfully land Curiosity in Gale Crater in 2012. We started to look for that opportunity almost immediately after we launched Curiosity in 2011. We got a new start on the project in 2012. We had Our instruments selected by mid-2014, and then we got down to work accommodating those instruments and experiments, and started building the vehicle. Along the way, we had plenty of challenges. We had to qualify a new planetary parachute. So another first time we've done that as an agency in 40 or 50 years. It's not an easy thing to do. It requires a number of suborbital rocket flights out of Wallops. We managed to get that done, and we got through a number of other challenges in our development as well. Kind of late in the game, we were asked to accommodate this little thing called the Mars helicopter. And as you can see, it was well after most of the payloads were assigned to the project, and so we had to do a little bit of a magic trick to get that one on the rover. Pulled a bit of a rabbit out of a hat, but I guess it was fate because we managed to get it done, and the helicopter team delivered their system, and it's sitting up with the Perseverance rover on top of our Atlas V rocket, getting ready to go to Mars with us. So you all know the launch is coming up, and of course there's about a 6.5-month cruise to Mars, and we'll land the middle of February of 2021 at Jezreel Crater. So if you go to the next graphic, please. Okay, this is the important part. This is where I talk about the team. This is just a small fraction of the team, believe it or not. This is just the JPL team, and it's just a fraction of the more than 2,000 people over the course of the mission development that worked on the project at JPL. And of course, our team didn't stop at JPL. Pretty much every NASA center participated in this project in one form or another. It was really a cross-agency effort, and something we're extremely appreciative of all the support that we got. And it didn't stop there. Thomas mentioned we have 3 instruments from Europe, one from France, one from Spain, one from Norway, and of course we have a very large science team. I think it's more than 250 scientists really from around the world which are participating in this project as well. If you bring up the next graphic, I think we got a picture here of the spacecraft. I like it because it gives you a sense of the complexity of this system. You see the cruise stage up on top. The rover is a little hard to see, but you can see one of the wheels there, and the helicopter is actually mounted underneath the body of the rover, and they're both nestled up into the upper portion of the entry capsule, and we're about to bring the heat shield up to encapsulate the entire spacecraft. This is right before going into our integrated flow with the launch vehicle just a few weeks ago. You can't build something this complex without a lot of help from our industry partners, and they stepped up big time. We built flight hardware in 44 out of the 50 states in the country, more than 550 different cities and towns and communities. So no matter where you are in this country, you don't have to go very far probably to find somebody that's been part of this mission. And it's a tremendous team effort. We work with cutting edge technology, and when we do that, we expect to be challenged. And as Thomas and the administrator have mentioned, our fundamental job is to explore new places we haven't been, answer questions we don't know the answers to, sometimes create questions that we didn't even know we needed to ask. And so you expect new issues and new problems, I have to say, along the way. But really, nothing prepared us for what we had to deal with in the middle of March as a pandemic struck. And not just our team, but obviously communities across the country and the world. We really, at that point of the mission, we were in our final assembly activities. It's critically important that the team do that assembly correctly, that they do it without making mistakes or damaging the hardware. There's really no safety net at that point. We're working with a very limited schedule. Every day, every shift, every hour is something we're scrutinized to make sure we're going to stay on track, because we got a 20-day planetary launch window, and if we miss it, we're going to push out by a couple years. And so, you know, just having the coronavirus issue at that point in time was very challenging for us. And of course, no matter how many hardships we were facing, there's a community out there, first responders, nurses, doctors, and medical community that were really facing life and death situations at the same time. And so I asked the team a couple months ago to do something to kind of represent this particular challenge that we all faced here in 2020 on this mission. And I think if you bring up the next graphic, you can see a technician on our assembly team installing a plate. This is on the, a little hard to tell, but it's on the aft port side, left side of the rover. And we call the plate the Perseverance COVID-19 plate. And there's a good shot of it. You can see we have representation of the Earth on the top, kind of to symbolize the challenge that we faced, you know, globally as the pandemic struck. We have a representation of the spacecraft leaving the Earth and heading to Mars. And of course, all of this is appropriately supported by the rod and serpent of the medical community. You know, during this period, this is a group of people that really inspired, I think, our team to keep going. And we hope that in some small way this mission can help inspire the people that have had to go through this pandemic as well. So if we go to the next graphic, please. I mentioned the team. You saw some pictures. Our team actually doesn't end with international contributions and industry partners and other NASA centers. We include all of you as well. And this plate, if you look at the top left corner of this plate, you'll see 3 small microfiche chips, which Thomas referred to. These are the places where his family's names and 11 million other names are etched onto those microfiche chips. We had only intended to fly one, but we got so much interest, we couldn't fit it on one, so we flew 3. And you see on the plate as well a representation of the solar system with Earth and Mars, and there is some hidden Morse code, I think, in the rays of the sun, which people quickly recognized spelled out "explore as one," which is what we intend to do. You know, we're going to launch the vehicle here in just a couple days, and we're looking forward to having everybody come along for the ride. If you go to nasa.gov, be my guest, you'll find plenty of experiences there to see the launch and to see some of the behind the scenes interviews. Also at mars.nasa.gov/Mars2020. There's, if you click on the participate, there's opportunities to get to some pretty cool social media filters. There's a photo booth there where you can take a picture with the Mars Perseverance rover, as some competitions and some other things. So we invite all of you to ride shotgun along with us starting on Thursday. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to our launch director, Omar Baez.
Thank you, Matt. And as everybody else here has mentioned, our situation did change. I would have never thought that a launch director would be working from home. And I've done that for the last 5 months. And we used to have something called every other year here called Take Your Kids to Work. Well, guess what? Every day was Take Your Kids to Work day. And I bet you it's been an experience for the kids, but it's humbling as a parent to see how our whole team, from the range to our partners at JPL to our partners ULA to our folks at headquarters, how we all had to adjust to work in this environment and to collaborate electronically, where before it was a face-to-face interaction versus, you know, seeing somebody's little picture on a computer screen and voice. And even as simple as a launch readiness review, which we had this morning, where it would have been shoulder to shoulder, that room would have been full and people standing up in the back, sparse settings, everybody wearing a mask. You had trouble hearing some people because you're wearing these masks. So there's a challenge and a penalty that goes with doing these things. And I've seen the team react and overcome all of that. And it makes me very proud. And here we are, a couple of days from launch. We did complete the launch readiness review. If I could have the folks roll a short video here, I'll show you how we're going to get Perseverance to the red planet. And it starts with that right there. That's the Atlas V with its RD-180 motors being stacked into the MLP at the VIF at Complex 41. That's SRMs going up. We're flying 4 of them on this mission, and that gives the Atlas that extra oomph it needs to leave the Earth's gravity well with perseverance and ingenuity. And there you see about the last time we got to see the rover and helicopter stack before it got encapsulated. And we took that out to Complex 41 on the 7th and stacked it on top of the vehicle, got it ready. Environmentally, for planetary protection purposes, we had to prepare that area to be able to ingress and egress, and on the 24th of this month we inserted the RTG, which is going to power the rover on Mars for the next couple of years. And we finished out all our testing, and all that remains is I have 3 goes to go. Tomorrow at 8 in the morning, I give the go for the vehicle to roll out. We take a day of rest after tomorrow to get synced up with having to come in at 2 or 3 in the morning, give a go to fuel the vehicle. And once we're ready and the spacecraft's configured, 1 more go. And 4 minutes later, we're going to be flying to Mars. And that makes my job really simple. And over to Tori to explain the rest of it.
All right. Thank you, Omar. I cannot tell you how thrilled we are to lift Perseverance. ULA and its Heritage rockets have taken every U.S. mission to Mars, but this one is arguably the most sophisticated, in some ways the most exciting of all of them. So it will sit atop our mighty Atlas in the 541 configuration. I like to call that one the Dominator because that is our second most powerful Atlas. So supplementing that core with its 860,000 pounds of thrust from the RD-180 will be 4 massive solid rocket motors that you saw in Omar's video, each of them generating another 280,000 pounds of thrust. This rocket is going to leap off the pad with this relatively tiny payload, so do not blink when they say ignition. Now I've got a mission profile video to show you that will just kind of walk through what that flight will look like. If you could run that, please.
3, 2, 1. Main engine start, 0, and liftoff of the Atlas V.
The Atlas V RD-180 main engine and 4 solid rocket boosters ignite to generate more than 10.2 million newtons, or 2.3 million pounds of thrust, to lift the rocket on its way towards a hyperbolic escape trajectory. Shortly after liftoff, Atlas begins a pitchover to attain the proper flight path while minimizing the dynamic pressure the vehicle experiences during flight. The Atlas V reaches Mach 1, the speed of sound, at 35 seconds. Following burnout, the 4 SRBs are jettisoned at 1 minute 49 seconds. In the next 2.5 minutes of first stage flight, the Atlas V will more than triple its velocity. At 3 minutes 27 seconds, the payload fairing is jettisoned. At 4 minutes 22 seconds, propellant levels deplete and the booster engine shuts down. The Atlas V is now traveling at more than 21,680 kilometers, or 13,470 miles per hour, and located nearly 156 kilometers, or 97 miles in altitude, and 497 kilometers, or 309 miles downrange. 6 seconds later, the Atlas Centaur separation system activates to release the booster stage. The vehicle now weighs a little more than 5% of what it did at liftoff. 10 seconds later, the first burn of the Centaur main engine begins. Burning liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen, the Centaur is attaining orbital velocity. At approximately 11.5 minutes into flight, cutoff of the Centaur main engine, or MECO 1, occurs. The mission now enters a 30-minute coast phase in preparation for the Earth escape burn. The Centaur main engine is restarted at 45 minutes. This burn provides the required thrust for Centaur to escape Earth orbit. Approximately 8 minutes later, final cutoff of the Centaur main engine occurs. This completes powered flight. Centaur will coast for nearly 5 minutes in preparation for spacecraft separation. At about 57.5 minutes, Centaur releases the spacecraft into a hyperbolic orbit, traveling at more than 41,000 kilometers, or nearly 26,000 miles per hour, on a 7-month cruise to Mars, where it will seek signs of ancient life on the red planet and collect rock and soil samples for possible return to Earth.
So the vehicle is sitting atop its launch platform in our vertical assembly or vertical integration facility right now. Processing has been going very smoothly for the last several days. So Atlas is go, Centaur is go, and we are literally chomping at the bit to take this nuclear-powered dune buggy out to Mars.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Next, we're going to go to Jessica Williams of the 45th Space Wing, weather officer.
Well, overall, the weather looks very favorable for launch Thursday morning. Today, we had a surface ridge of high pressure built into South Florida, and what this did for us is shift the weather pattern from last week so that we have southwest winds in the low levels in the mornings. That's offshore winds. And this pattern will persist through this weekend, so through the 48-hour backup window. So this gives us dry mornings with those offshore winds, but it does give us chances for showers and thunderstorms in the afternoon and evening. So if we look at our launch day forecast, the chart for the launch day forecast, we should have a 20% probability of violation for the cumulus cloud rule and the thick cloud layer rule. And this is really just due to a weak boundary being off the coast of the southeast. So we're expecting to see isolated to a few scattered showers just offshore from Complex 41, but they will be moving very little or moving away from the pad. We have that slight chance of violating for the cumulus cloud rule, and there's also expected to be some mid-level clouds scattered to broken associated with this weak boundary off the coast. So we could see just a brief period of violating the thick cloud layer rule, but again, overall, it's only at a 20% violation for the overall 2-hour window. So if we look at our 24-hour backup chart, again, we have offshore winds from the southwest in the morning, 8 to 10 knots. We have a 10% probability of violating for the cumulus cloud rule as that weak boundary off the coast of the southeast starts to diminish, and the chances for any cumulus clouds in the flight path over the water just off the coast reduce from the day before. And if we look at our 48-hour backup window for Saturday morning, the weather still looks favorable with offshore winds from the southwest or from the west, really. They pick up a little bit, 12 knots with sustained gusts to 16 knots at 230 feet. However, the upper level wind flow does change and become more from the east and stronger. So if we do see any showers or thunderstorms over the Gulf Stream, which is pretty typical for this time of year in the morning, and if they do produce any anvil clouds, there's just a very slight possibility of those anvils reaching close to the coast. So that is why we have that 20% probability of violation for the attached and detached anvil cloud rules for the 48-hour backup day on Saturday morning. So again, overall, we're in a very favorable weather pattern for a morning launch time frame for Thursday through Saturday.
Thank you so much, Jessica. Now we're going to start taking questions from reporters and social media. For reporters, please remember to press *1 to ask your questions, and those online, you can use the hashtag countdown to Mars. Our first question comes from Marcia Dunn of AP. Marcia?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you, Marcia.
Yes, great. I cannot remember so much company on the way to Mars as there is happening this year. And I was wondering if either Mr. Blindenstein or Dr. Zurbuchen could comment on China and the UAE on their way to Mars, and whether there's any sense of competition, and is the pressure on now that the world has 2 good launches off and NASA's coming up third? Thanks.
Sure, I'll start. A couple of things. Number one, we welcome more nations taking trips to Mars and studying it and delivering the science and sharing the science with the world. That's what science is all about. And of course, it's a very uniting kind of thing. I honestly don't see this as a competition at all. This is our 9th time to go to Mars and land softly and do robotic experiments and discovery. And so we've been doing this now for decades successfully. And of course, this mission is by far the most sophisticated mission ever. So I don't see it as a competition, but certainly we welcome more explorers to deliver more science than ever before, and we look forward to seeing what it is that they're able to discover.
Nothing else to add. Thanks.
Spaceflight Now. Stephen?
And I think my question is from Matt Wallace. You mentioned you worked on numerous rovers before, and you listed all the firsts on this mission. I'm curious if you could compare the complexity and risks associated with this mission with Curiosity and previous missions. You know, everyone was kind of keyed up for Curiosity's landing back in 2012 with the 7 minutes of terror. The sky crane was brand new. Just interested, given your experience base and your assessment of the risks and complexity of this mission overall compared to prior NASA rovers. Thanks.
Sure. Yeah. From a complexity perspective, it's clearly a more sophisticated vehicle. As I said, we're carrying about 50% more surface payload than Curiosity did, and that was by far the most complex thing we had ever done up until that time. So we're taking this a step further, and really the sampling system that we have on this vehicle, because we are collecting rocks and soil samples that we ultimately want to bring back to the Earth and look for really trace chemical signatures from billions of years ago, very faint signatures. The system that we use to collect those samples has to be immensely clean, and so we had to sterilize it and we had to clean it from an organics and chemical perspective, and we had to keep it that way from all the rest of the systems that we had to use to get the system to Mars. And so that was, from a complexity perspective, it was really another step beyond what we did on Curiosity. From a risk perspective, I think one of still the highest risk portion of all of these missions is the landing process. You mentioned it, the 7 minutes of terror. There's really nothing we can do. We call it do EDL, do entry, descent, and landing. We literally send a command to the spacecraft that says that, and then for the spacecraft on its own has to get from outside the planet, moving at 12,000 miles an hour, all the way down safely to the surface, without any human interaction, and it's basically a controlled disassembly the whole way. It's by far the most complex, or the most the highest risk phase of the mission still, and we have the good fortune on 2020 to have leveraged the system that we designed on Curiosity. And so not only do we have all the testing behind us on this system that we did before we launched and landed Curiosity, we have the Curiosity flight itself and all the telemetry that came back, and it performed extremely well during that mission. And then we did a whole lot additional testing, you know, to launch the spacecraft. Still no guarantees. You know, our hearts will still be beating hard when we get to that point of the mission. But I do think it's an advantage that we have. This is not a first-time landing system as we had on Curiosity.
Do you mind adding a word or two about the terrain relative navigation? Of course, if we landed with the Curiosity system as it is, we couldn't go to where we're going, right?
That's right. Yeah, I mentioned briefly before that for the first time we're going to use a hazard avoidance system, autonomous hazard avoidance system. We call it terrain relative navigation. And it allows us to go to Jezreel Crater, which is a very interesting scientific site because it's got a lot of rocks and escarpments and sand dunes and a lot of variation in the terrain. And all those things are wonderful for scientists who are looking for stratigraphy and other things. But they all represent landing hazards for us. And so to get to a scientifically valuable site like Jezreel, we had to develop a new hazard avoidance system, and we are flying that. It's a system that essentially uses orbital imagery that we have from our other spacecraft. We identify hazards on the surface. We mark those hazards on a map. We load that map onto the spacecraft, and as we're coming down, getting close to the planet, we take a picture. We find ourselves in the hazard map that we've got on board, and then we divert away from the most significant hazards to the spacecraft. And so it does significantly improve our probability of landing in a safe way, particularly in rough terrain at Jezreel. This is a system that we've tested extensively. Thomas, in particular, wanted to make sure that that we had all of the necessary checks and balances and rigorous reviews in place for this system before we selected Jezreel as a final destination. But we have exercised the system out in the desert with simulated landings. We have simulation. We have computer simulations. And it just works extremely well. It's a very powerful and robust system, and we have a lot of confidence in it.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Jackie Goddard of the Times of London.
Yes, hello. And maybe this question, I think, is for Matt. Adding the audio is an interesting extra on this mission. And I wondered, what is the scientific significance of adding this extra sensory dimension to the mission, and at what point in the entry, descent, landing sequence does it kick in? Thank you.
So we'll turn on the microphone pretty early in the process before we deploy the parachute, and we should be able to hear some of the spacecraft pyrotechnic events and separation events, perhaps the atmosphere at some level. Interacting with the spacecraft itself. So we turn it on pretty early in the entry, descent, and landing system. The microphone we expect to survive landing and to also be usable on the surface. We have two microphones actually. I'm talking about a general engineering microphone now, and we do think that microphone will be able to hear our big rotary percussive drill out on the end of the robot arm as it jackhammers its way into rocks, as well as the wheels crunching over the surface of Mars. We think we'll be able to hear those things. From an engineering diagnostic perspective, we're not quite sure, how it will help us. That's something we're going to have to understand, I think, as we get some experience with it. There is a second microphone. It's mounted on the top of the mast, and it's associated with one of our instruments. The instrument is called SuperCam, and it's a laser breakdown spectrometer. Essentially, it fires a laser, and as the laser goes out, it creates a little plasma cloud with the rocks and the dust that it interacts with. And when we fire this in our test beds or in Atlo, you can hear it pop. You can hear the zap almost. And the science community is hoping, with that targeted microphone up on the top of the mast, that they will learn something about the composition of the things that the laser is interacting with, in particular. But it's a little bit of an experiment. We haven't done this before. It's the first time we've taken this human sense to Mars and exercised it. So we're going to find out. I think we're going to learn as we go.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Jackie. Our next question comes from Irene Klotz of Aviation Week.
Thanks very much. I think this is also for Matt. Have the repositioning of the NASA 3 Mars orbiters already begun to be able to provide, I guess, as real-time comms as possible for the entry, descent, and landing?
I'm not quite sure I heard the entire question, but I think it's related to the NASA orbiters and their support role for entry, descent, and landing communications.
Yeah, if that repositioning, if any, has already started, or when you expect to do that, and which orbiters will be used?
So we're primarily going to use the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, MRO, for entry, descent, and landing communications. And it has a minor amount of repositioning, as you mentioned, that'll be required so that it's exactly overhead when we land at Jezreel Crater. And I do not believe that repositioning has quite started yet, but we got plenty of time to get that done before we land.
Thank you. We're going to take some questions from social media. Our first one comes from J.K. Trzynski. What sort of data would Perseverance gather on the Martian surface? Who wants to take that?
What data will Perseverance gather on the Mars surface? Well, we've talked a lot, I think, about the science mission of the project. And, Thomas, did you want to go ahead and say a few words?
First of all, amazing question. That's why we're going there. I think the other thing I want to say, there's a show right after this really focused on science with all details. But, if you look back from, look at the data that we're going to gather. You talked about the weather instrument, kind of the meta that is standing there, and it's really a weather station right there in Jezreel Crater. You go look at the cameras. There's numerous cameras that are there. You talked about SuperCam. There's another camera that is, from a point of view of field of view and resolution, really quite unprecedented. Then you have the instruments that are looking at composition. Some of them remotely, some of them by looking at samples, and really actually equipping us to gather the right samples, to actually gather them and put them into these very clean sample tubes to bring back. Everything, I would argue, is set up for that, to really get us that the ultimate data that we want to gather are these samples. I mean, for us, those are the most precious samples that we believe we've had as humans, in terms of samples of nature, of really answering this important question of astrobiology the administrator talked about. That is the ultimate, data, not only the sample itself, but the context in which this sample is collected. We learn from geology here. We learn from the important analysis in every environment that in fact, that context is very important for the interpretation thereof. But I just want to block the session later. What did I miss, Matt?
No, I think you hit most of it. As Thomas said, we have very powerful spectrometers out on the end of the robot arm. We'll be able to look at the rock at a spatial resolution of 100 microns, which is tiny, and really understand from spot to spot, how the chemical composition of the rock changes. We've got spectrometers up on the top of the mast, which I mentioned, the SuperCam. We've got zoom cameras up there as well. We've got the weather station. We also have a subsurface radar sounder for the first time on the surface of Mars, which will help us understand contextually the geography of the landing site. That's the Norwegian-provided radar, which I mentioned before. So we have a very, very powerful suite of instruments that'll help us do exactly what Thomas said, which is find the right samples to collect. You know, we can't bring back a lot, a lot of material when we bring these samples back. And so we want to make sure we've gone to the right site. We want to make sure we've picked the right targets. And we want to make sure we understand the context and the chemistry of those targets when we bring them back.
Real quick, Bettina, if I could. So when you talk about what is the data that's coming back, you mentioned spectroscopy, the idea that you can shoot energy into a material. Think of radio waves, or in this case, it could be light waves or infrared waves, and then certain wavelengths bounce back and other wavelengths are absorbed. And based on that, we can make determinations as to the chemical composition of the materials. And here on Earth, what we have been studying is the chemical composition of materials where we know that chemical composition was a result of ancient life here on Earth. So we're taking what we've learned from our own planet and we're applying it to another planet to make determinations as to whether or not there was maybe at one time biology. We're talking about microbial kind of organisms on Mars. And then once we make that determination, we, no kidding, cache a sample. If we think it's a high probability that there could have been life in that place, we cache a sample so that one day, 4 years from now, or I should say 2026, 6 years from now, we can bring it back to Earth and study it and actually make a no-kidding determination whether or not humans, or I should say Earth, is the only place in our own solar system that has the capability of hosting life. And that's, I think, one of the most exciting things about this mission. So thank you, Bettina.
And thank you all. In many ways, you've answered our next question from social media. Ralph Bennett asks, why do we need another rover there? What more can we learn from Mars?
Well, there's a lot. I'll let you guys.
I think it's precisely that. What's really interesting is, like, every time we build a rover and we send it there, with it go a number of questions that we have. For example, spirit and opportunity. You talked about it, Matt, earlier. Or questions about water, the history of water at the surface of Mars. So the entire instrument complement was laid out for that. Curiosity was about really trying to understand the composition and are there any organics, right? Many questions that were open, and and really what we're learning from curiosity, and there's surprises even today that the level of complexity in some of these organics is much higher. Now it turns out the word complex means the more complex, the more life, kind of the more the likelihood to life. So that's why that's such an important characteristics. And so now what Perseverance is really, I would argue, the first, and we've said it, the administrator said it earlier, the first mission that really had at its core the question about life, astrobiology, and therefore the instruments are very different for that. And it's I would argue, very hard to imagine coming up with that instrument complement and that location without the other insights that we got from these other missions before, the ones I mentioned as well as others. And so for us, it's a very different, I mean, it's, in science, when you peel back a layer, it's not like an onion where the layer that comes from below, it looks like the layer above. It's a very different set of questions that are there, and we're peeling back that onion and frankly going after a question that humans over millennia have asked, and we're answering it for the first time with the tools of science, potentially the best way we can. I mean, for me, that's what it's about. I mean that question, it's an old question. Like, you go read old philosophers of the past, the Greeks, wherever the culture is, the people have asked those questions. We're starting to address it with the instruments that are there. That's the amazing part of it.
Very exciting. We're going to go to another question from our reporters on the line. Mike Wall of space.com. Mike?
Thank you all. This one's probably, again, for Matt. Like you mentioned, you had to pull off sort of like a magic trick with ingenuity to sort of make it fit. Could you go into a little more detail about what you needed to do and what the exact challenges were sort of posed by that additional payload? Thanks.
Can I start this one if it's all right, Bettina? So this is probably my fault, Matt, and I apologize. Thomas Zurbuchen brought this into the administrator's suite in my early days as being the NASA administrator, and he had this, hey, what if we were to do this? And I loved it, and I told Thomas, whatever you can do to make that happen, I'm all for it. And of course, Thomas brought that to you, and so I know it was not easy to get done, but I will tell you, I sent a tweet about, it wasn't called Ingenuity at the time, it was just called the Mars helicopter, but I sent a tweet about it on like a Friday afternoon at 5 p.m., and I didn't have a lot of Twitter followers at the time, and I sent a tweet, and it was like, within an hour or two, there's 5,000 retweets. I mean, it just kind of caught fire, and everybody, and then all the media started covering. It was a very exciting moment. So anyway, I know it was difficult. Want you to know how much I appreciate all the work that you've done. So go ahead.
I'll say I remember an all-hands meeting where we were, right after we were asked to try to accommodate the helicopter, and some of the managers were kind of scratching their heads and wondering how we were going to do this. And I asked for a show of hands from our own team who would like to see the helicopter on this mission, and pretty much every hand went up. So even the people that had to figure it out were excited by the project. And it was difficult. It's a very, very unusual payload. It's very lightweight. Because it has to fly in this very low density air. It's got these big, stiff carbon fiber blades that sit out that have to be protected from the debris that we kick up, for instance, during entry, descent, and landing. It's got legs that have to fold up and then have to be deployed out. And we had to, essentially the rover was full. The inside of the vehicle, which is where we have most of our electronic systems so that we can keep them warm, that was full. The top of the vehicle was pretty much overpopulated already, and so and we had to come up with a way of accommodating it. And ultimately, we decided to put it up under the belly of the vehicle. It turns out that the belly pan is a pretty separable thing. We could kind of take that belly pan off, and we can give it to the team that was developing the accommodation engineering systems for the helicopter, and they used some of our existing actuators and motors and things like that. We sort of hunted around for available spare flight hardware to figure out how we could do it and get it on the vehicle in a way that, one, kept the helicopter safe, and two, allowed us to deploy it off of the vehicle in a way that it wouldn't represent a risk or a threat to the rest of the mission. We called it, the objective essentially was do no harm to the primary mission, because this was an extra technology experiment. And beyond that, our team was oversubscribed, just with engineering challenges ourselves with the sampling system and the instruments. And so we made a phone call, and one of our system contractors, Lockheed Martin in Denver, stepped up to the plate. We provided them a basic design and some hardware and some engineering support, and we were able to figure out how to accommodate it underneath the vehicle. And we went through a lot of testing to make sure, in fact, that that it would deploy, that it would stow appropriately, and that it would deploy safely on the surface of Mars. And then, of course, we still had to figure out how to operate it once we got it there. And I think we were working through those opportunities and those issues. So we'll be ready to go when it's time to fly the helicopter on Mars, but it wasn't easy.
Fantastic. We're going to take our last question from Leo Enright of Irish Television. Leo?
Thanks, Bettina, and indeed thanks to Matt Wallace and to Dr. Zurbuchen for their wonderful contributions. But my question is for the administrator. Mars 2020 is basically Mars 2026. And I'm going to ask a political question, which I think I can ask because I'm an ocean away, so nobody is going to think I've got an agenda. A lot of your international partners will be wondering, will you be willing to continue to serve as NASA administrator no matter who gets elected in November? Now, assuming, of course, that you're asked.
Look, my job right now is to do these stunning achievements on behalf of the United States of America. And look, I appreciate the question, but look, I serve at the pleasure of the president. I serve at the pleasure of the current president, and I think it's important that the next president has the NASA administrator that he wants. The way the political system in the United States works, the NASA administrator is selected by the president. I think it's important. You have to have that relationship. Look at what we're doing right now. We've got the Artemis program, which we have reestablished that we're going to the moon sustainably, that we're going with a purpose to get to Mars. And because of that, we've had really big budget requests. The President of the United States has put on the table the biggest budget that NASA has ever had in nominal dollars ever. Now, of course, in real dollars, Apollo was bigger. But we're heading the right direction. And that's because the President of the United States trusts the NASA administrator. And I would recommend to whoever the President is at any point in time, pick a NASA administrator that you trust to get the job done. Period. End of story. And look, I've had the time of my life in this job. I'm not going to lie. It's the greatest job I've ever had. But I think there's a time when it's somebody else's turn, and I am under no illusions that I'm the only one capable of doing this job. So there's a lot of people that would be even better than me, and we'll leave it at that. So thank you for the question.
Thank you, Leo. With that, we're going to end our questions, but we're going to turn it over to final remarks from NASA Administrator.
Well, thank you, Bettina, and thank you for the panel participating in this today. What an exciting time. And I know we just had this conversation about ingenuity and the helicopter that's going to fly on Mars. I want to kind of put it in perspective for a moment. Imagine looking from Perseverance out at a helicopter that is flying around Perseverance, and the helicopter is looking back at Perseverance, getting us images of Perseverance, what Perseverance is doing. We're going to be able to see with our own eyes, with motion pictures, these kind of activities happening on another world. And I just can't tell you how excited I am about ingenuity and, of course, Perseverance, the first astrobiology mission. We shouldn't forget, we're proving out that we can turn the carbon dioxide atmosphere of Mars into pure oxygen for life support, because the President has given us an agenda to plant an American flag on Mars, and, of course, to go with our international partners and our commercial partners, all of which is in President Trump's Space Policy Directive 1. So we have this big agenda. This is a precursor mission, but it's also a scientific mission in its own right. And there's so much more to discover, and we're so looking forward to it. So I just want to say thank you to everybody for paying attention. If you want to follow us, if you want to participate with us virtually, from Thursday forward, nasa.gov. I would encourage everybody to go to nasa.gov, and this is all about the next generation. We want to inspire people. So have your kids or your grandkids tune in. This is a great moment for not just the United States of America, but also for the world.
Thank you so much, Jim. And thank you so much for joining our conversation. The next briefing will be the Mars 2020 Science Briefing today at 3 p.m. And then we mentioned launch coverage begins on Thursday at 7 a.m. and the launch is at 7:50. You can continue to talk about the greatness of this Mars Perseverance rover, Mars 2020, and Mars Ingenuity by joining us at Twitter and Facebook at Mars Perseverance. And hashtag Countdown to Mars. Thank you so much for joining us today. We'll see you again soon. Thank you.
Why we explore Mars, the mysteries of the red planet, the history of water, the possibilities of life.
You learn something and then you design the next mission based on what you learn.
Has allowed us to literally go back in time on Mars.
The first picture will cover an area of 176 miles.
Mariner 4 began transmitting back images.
The first photograph that a human being has ever seen from the surface of another planet.
On August 20th, 1975, the first Viking spaceship was launched.
You are seeing something that no other human has ever seen before.
Former seas and mountains.
Huge canyons.
That sense of wonderment and achievement and always working towards your goal.
We can do, and we will do.
And liftoff.
Touchdown confirmed.
Mars is unavoidably special.
We've landed and we've scooped.
We've roved, we've orbited.
Together we did it, but the attitude was together we can do it.
The future is what you make out of it. You can make it real.
And here we are with Mars Perseverance, 51 years later, getting ready to do the first ever Mars return mission.
Eventually, we can bring those samples back to Earth and determine for the very first time, did life exist on Mars?
I'm D.C. Eagle of NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Southern California. We're here at the Kennedy Space Center to talk about NASA's next mission to the Red Planet, Mars 2020 and the Perseverance Rover. And we're going to be talking about the science and engineering that's going to make this mission a great mission. Here to talk about Mars 2020, we have today Lori Glaze, the Director of the Planetary Science Division at NASA headquarters in Washington. And across the country, we have with us Jennifer Trosper, the Deputy Project Manager for Mars 2020 at JPL. Also at JPL, we have Farah Alabay, and she's a mobility engineer for Mars 2020, and she's, of course, also at JPL. Now back here at the Kennedy Space Center media site, we have Ken Farley, who is the project scientist for Mars 2020, and he is from Caltech. Finally, we have Tanya Bozak, and she's a Mars 2020 scientist from MIT. So we're going to start things out with Lori Glaze. Lori?
Great. Thanks, DC. So as DC says, I'm the director for the Planetary Science Division at NASA. And the main goal of NASA's planetary program is to explore the solar system to help us answer important questions about how the planets formed and how they evolved. And of course, there's a lot of really special places to go throughout the solar system, but Mars has always held a special place in that exploration. If I could have the first graphic, please. Going back to the Mariner missions, the Mariner flybys, and the Viking landings, Mars has always held that special place up through even our current missions, the current series of orbiters and landers and rovers that are currently operating on the surface today, and of course leading up to Perseverance, which is about to launch. Some of the reasons why we've always found Mars to just be such a special place and so fascinating: for one, it's relatively accessible. It's relatively close in the solar system. We can get there. We can arrive in a matter of about 6 to 7 months. So that's relatively short on the planetary exploration timescale. But in addition, it also holds a lot of really unique scientific value, particularly for trying to understand planets with rocky surfaces and planets with atmospheres, helping us understand how they form and evolve and help us better understand our own history on Earth. Mars preserves on its surface some incredibly complex and diverse geology. On Earth, of course, our crust is constantly recycled, weathered and eroded, and so it's very hard to find places that have preserved that history from billions of years ago. And yet on Mars, we can find places where we see that full breadth of history preserved onto the surface, on the surface. It also, of course, is a planet with an atmosphere. It has a climate, just like Earth has a climate. And much like Earth, the climate on Mars has changed over time. And so by understanding when and how that climate has changed helped us better understand our own climate evolution on Earth. It's also a place where, on the surface, since it's so old, it's preserved. We've also understood that in the last about 20 years, we've come to better understand that the surface of Mars was actually probably much warmer and wetter in the past with a denser atmosphere, and that perhaps several billion years ago, life could have possibly taken form on Mars as well, similar as it did on Earth. And by going back to Mars, we might be able to find evidence of when life could have taken place or could have taken hold on Mars. This is a study of astrobiology, of understanding the environments that could support life and understanding if and when life can actually come to be. And Mars 2020 Perseverance is in fact our first mission from NASA that's specifically designed to answer these astrobiology questions on Mars. And if I could have the next graphic, please. But everyone will tell you that this is an incredibly complex mission, but they didn't do it alone. All of those that worked on this mission are leaning on the legacy of all those rovers that have come before, from Sojourner to Spirit and Opportunity to Curiosity and now to Perseverance. We're building on that legacy of what's come before, but Perseverance is also laying the groundwork for what comes next. You're going to hear a lot today about the incredible science that Perseverance is going to do on the surface of Mars and about its main goal, which is to collect some samples to bring back to Earth in the future. And our next big mission, of course, is going to be Mars Sample Return, where we plan to execute the first ever round trip to Mars and execute the first ever launch from the surface of another planet. And that whole mission will be focused on trying to bring those samples, those very precious samples, back to Earth where we can analyze them here with our incredibly capable laboratories here on Earth. And all of this is also then leading towards potential human exploration in the coming decades. We've got specific technologies on the Perseverance rover that you'll hear about that are also going to be talking about, that will be demonstrating these core capabilities that we're going to need in order to support human exploration in those coming decades. And I wanted to just give a plug real quick for two more press conferences that will be held tomorrow afternoon for both the technologies and for Mars Sample Return, if you want to learn more about those two things as well. And so right now what I'd like to do is hand it over to Jennifer Trosper, who's actually worked on all 5 of the rovers that have successfully been delivered to Mars by NASA and JPL. Jennifer is the Deputy Project Scientist for Surface Operations. She's going to tell us a little bit more about the rovers themselves, the rover itself, and about what we're going to do once we get to Mars.
Thanks, Lori. Well, it's great to be here today, and I'm very excited to tell you about our new rover, Perseverance. But I have to look back and say, you know, as a farm girl growing up in Ohio, it took me a while to get the rover bug. Now, I've worked on all of these rovers, but I didn't work on robotics growing up. But in 1997, I had the opportunity to be part of the Mars Pathfinder team with the Sojourner rover. And ever since that day, when we landed on Mars, and I saw the fun and the excitement and I got the bug of exploration, and so now I've worked on every Mars rover. It's been a privilege not just to work on the rovers, but also to work with the great teams that build these rovers. And today I'm going to tell you about our next great rover, Perseverance. Now go ahead and show the first slide. The first slide shows our predecessor rovers. You see the small rover is Sojourner rover, the one I just talked about. And then we have Spirit and Opportunity, the mid-size go-kart rover. And then Curiosity, which is more like a small car. And now we have Perseverance. And as I look back over my career of working on these rovers, it's exciting to see how we just incrementally built up the capabilities of the engineering and the science to have this enormously capable rover today called Perseverance. I'm going to talk a little bit about what those capabilities are. I would say Perseverance is unique in that all of her capabilities are very much focused on her science mission. Now, her science mission is challenging. She needs to go explore, find, select, actually core and cache samples for future return to Earth. And so we've needed to add a lot of new things to Perseverance to make her able to do that. And we want her to do that in a location that is interesting enough to find samples that we want to bring back to Earth. And so that brought us to needing to add our first new technology. Our first new technology was terrain relative navigation. Now, we leveraged a lot of the Curiosity entry, descent, and landing system, but when Ken Farley and the science team decided that they wanted to land at Jezreel Crater, we realized that the current sky crane landing system would not land us there safely enough. And so, you know, you can kind of think if it's more scientifically interesting, then it has more engineering hazards. So you can go here to my next graphic, which shows what terrain relative navigation is. The engineering team, you know, got on board to say, well, we need to make this landing site safe. And so we added what is essentially our astronaut that we take to Mars that steers us away from hazards, and we call it terrain relative navigation. We can't take an astronaut, so we load Mars orbital maps that we get from the orbiters that are marked with hazards, and then we use a camera to take pictures as we're descending onto Mars, and then we compare those, figure out where we are in the map, and then divert by firing engines to get away from the hazards so that we can land safely. So this new technology allows us to land in Jezreel Crater, which is where the science team wants to go to do this investigation. Now, another interesting part of entry, descent, and landing. Now, entry, descent, and landing is always harrowing. It's hard, right? Mars is 100 million miles away. You start at 12,000 miles per hour at the top of the atmosphere. You have to get to 0 7 minutes later. And so it's a nail-biting thing. And we've added something to Perseverance, which is especially cool, so that we will get a front row seat. The vehicle actually has the ability to take selfies as it's going through the entry, descent, and landing process. Go ahead and show my next slide. This shows you where the cameras are that we have added to take pictures as we're descending onto the surface of Mars. We have parachute uplook cameras that will watch the parachute inflation. On the descent stage, we have some downlook cameras that will watch the rover go down on the sky crane. On the rover, we have uplook and downlook cameras. The uplook cameras watch the descent stage and we'll get the flyaway moment, which is awesome. And then the downlook cameras will watch the surface as we're placed on the ground on Mars. Very exciting. We also have a microphone on the rover, so we're listening to ourselves as we go through the atmosphere of Mars. We're listening to the pyro firings and the hardware being released. It's going to be one of the most exciting things that happens early in this mission, and I'm really looking forward to it. We'll record all that data, and then we'll send it back shortly after landing. Now, the next thing that's exciting about this rover, you know, entry, descent, and landing is always exciting, but it's only 7 minutes. And my personal favorite part of the mission is the surface mission, which for Perseverance is going to last for a Mars year, which is about 2 Earth years. And this Perseverance mission has to do the equivalent of about what Curiosity did, or 4 times what Curiosity did in the same amount of time. And so we've had to do a lot of things to make it smarter. And so go ahead and bring up my next slide. You can see that this is one of the things that we've done to make it smarter and have better sensing is we've added some cameras. You can see we have 23 cameras on the rover, and some of the new cameras we've added, we have new EE cams that are our navigation cameras that we use for autonomous driving. They're now color, they're twice the field of view, twice the resolution as the Curiosity cameras. We also have added better cameras to the front of the rover, the hazard cameras, which we use to actually place the arm very accurately. We even have a camera inside the rover that takes images of the samples before we seal them off. So we have lots of great sensors. And another thing that we do to make the rover smarter is we add a lot of software and computers. So if you can go on to my next graphic, I can show you a little bit about what makes the rover smart. The rover has about 13 different computing and processors. It has dozens of electronics boxes. I can't show you the software and the algorithms that make it smart, but this is the inside of the rover. The back of the rover is to the right, the front of the rover is to the left, and you can't even see the full sample caching system, which is another extraordinarily complex part of the rover. If you were to take all of the cables inside the rover, it would be about 3.5 miles long. So it's a very complicated vehicle. But we've made it smarter. The things that we've done to make it smarter, some of the new algorithms, I talked about terrain relative navigation. We've also added new auto navigation algorithms so that we can actually drive autonomously through more difficult terrains that have more rocks. We've added a capability for higher compression so that we can get more data down to the ground. We've added a capability so that after the rover drives, it can stop, check for hazards, and if there are no hazards, it can actually deploy the arm out and take some images and send those back to Earth so that we don't have to wait for the next day, and it speeds things up. We've also made some significant upgrades to our operations system. We have cloud-based tools that allow the science team to do collaboration around targeting and visualization, and we're much more efficient at simulating and validating those sequences because we have to send those to the rover every single day. And now, if you'll go ahead to my next slide, which is my final image. I love this image because it shows the rover folded up, ready to go, on its way to Mars. But it also shows the preeminent new capability that we've built on this rover, which is the sampling system. If you look at the front of the rover, you see the cage-like feature. That's the corer. That cores the samples from the surface of Mars. You'll also see the robotic arm. You can see the forearm and the upper arm that have the Mars 2020 and the Perseverance plates on them. You'll also be able to see the bit carousel, which is sort of in the center, the round thing. A couple other things to say about this image. The wheels are covered with anti-static wrap, and we do take that off before launch, so no worries there. And then you can see the rover's upside down in this picture. So you see the mast is actually stowed underneath the rover. You can see the American flag there at the bottom of the mast. Now, something that just kind of brings it home as far as how amazing this rover is the turret that's on the end of the robotic arm that includes the corer and also includes some other instruments. It weighs 80 pounds. And I think if you had told me back in 1997 when I was working on the Sojourner rover that in 20 years we'd be building a rover that had a robotic arm that could hold the weight of 3 Sojourner rovers in its hand, I might have been surprised. But here it is. It's the Perseverance rover. It's an amazing vehicle. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Farah Alabay, who will talk more about the mobility system.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Perseverance has some of the most ambitious science goals that we've ever attempted on the surface of Mars. Now, in order to achieve these, we need to travel long distances and over a variety of terrains. The enabling technology for this is the rover's mobility system. Now let's cue up my first video where you'll see the rover driving here in our clean room, and while you look at that, I can talk you through some of the specs the rover has. Perseverance is a rugged, all-terrain vehicle. It has a clearance of 2 feet, a wheel diameter of 21 inches. It can go over obstacles of up to 40 centimeters, that's just over a foot, and it can go up slopes of up to 30 degrees, so that's about a 57% grade. The rover has a top speed of 0.1 mile per hour, but most importantly, it can self-drive on Mars. Now remember, Mars doesn't have roads, it doesn't have maps, it doesn't have GPS, and yet Perseverance can self-drive for distances of up to 200 meters per day. In order to get there, in order to get to these specs, we've had to make some pretty significant upgrades from Perseverance's predecessor, which was Curiosity. The first upgrade that we made is to its wheels, and let's look at slide number 2 where you'll see the difference between the Curiosity and the Perseverance wheels. And we essentially went back to the drawing board here. You can see that the Perseverance tread pattern is much tighter, much closer together, and the treads are actually taller, which gives the wheels better traction. You can also see that the treads have a smooth sinusoidal pattern rather than the jagged pattern that Curiosity had. That gets rid of the hot spots that cause damage on the Curiosity wheels and gives us confidence with that, and along with the hundreds of hours of testing, obviously, that we've done here on Earth, that these wheels will survive the harsh Martian environment that they will be driving on. The biggest upgrade that we've made to the Perseverance rover, however, is its self-driving capability. Perseverance is able to self-drive 3 times faster than the Curiosity rover can, and that is mostly due to its ability to think while it drives. It's able to do what we call thinking while driving due to its additional computer, the Vision Compute Element, or the VCE. Now, the VCE was added to the rover in order to enable terrain relative navigation, which Jennifer talked about. But once we're on the surface, we no longer need our terrain relative navigation software, so we reuse that second brain in order to speed up our autonomous navigation process. Now, let's talk a little bit about what self-driving looks like on Mars, because it's pretty different from what self-driving cars might look like on Earth. So on Mars, as I mentioned, we don't have any maps, and so the rover has to literally build its own map as it drives onto the surface. The way it does that is that it uses 2 navigation cameras and takes a pair of stereo images. And then let's cue up my 3rd slide, where you'll see an image of the Mars yard, and next to it, a processed image of what the computer actually sees. So what the computer does on board is that it takes the imagery and identifies obstacles and also slopes. From there, it can decide which obstacles it can drive over versus which it has to drive around, and it decides on a path that it wants to drive on. Now, the key piece here is that as the rover crawls onto that map and drives through that path, it's actually already taking the next set of imagery and the next set of decisions that it has to make in order to continue moving. That allows Perseverance to drive smoothly in that autonomous navigation mode, and it can cover in that mode up to 250 feet per hour. Now, over this next 7 months, Perseverance is going to be on its way to Mars, but down here on Earth at JPL, we'll be up in the Mars yard. The Mars yard is essentially a giant sandbox, and we'll be setting up obstacle courses there for our Scarecrow rover. Scarecrow, which you saw on that last picture, is an Earth version of our rover that has 1/3 of the mass. And essentially, Scarecrow has the same weight here on Earth as Perseverance will have on Mars, since Mars has 1/3 of the gravity that Earth does. So here on Earth, we'll be putting Scarecrow through a variety of tests through our mazes, and what we'll be doing using those tests is fine-tuning our self-driving parameters so that in February of 2021, when we land on Mars, we'll be ready to hit the ground running and get along with that fantastic science that we have in store for the rover. And with that, let me hand you over to project scientist Ken Foley, who's going to talk to you about that science.
Thanks, Farah. As you've heard, the Mars 2020 mission has 3 major goals. The first is to seek the signs of life. The second is to collect and cache a suite of samples that a future mission could bring back to Earth. And the third is to test technologies that future explorers of Mars, either robotic or possibly even human, could take advantage of. If I could have the first graphic. I want to tell you a little bit more about the rover, and in particular about the science instruments. We have 7 entirely new instruments that we are flying with us, and I want to focus on just 2 of them because they illustrate a completely new kind of capability for a rover mission, and that is the pair of instruments that are on the robotic arm on the turret that Jennifer talked about. These 2 instruments are called Sherlock and Pixel. And what they do is they allow us to combine or co-register in a single postage stamp sized area things that you could see with your eyes, like color and texture, but also chemistry and mineralogy. And this is a very powerful combination. It's never been done before on Mars. And it will allow us to understand how rocks formed, what their history has been since they formed, and in particular is one of the key ways that we will look for evidence of life, for what we call biosignatures. And in that regard, the Sherlock instrument is particularly important because it will allow us to not only detect organic matter, but to also map its distribution in this microscopic area. And this is, of course, organic matter is, of course, one of the key kinds of observations that one makes to identify past evidence of life. In addition to those 2 instruments, I want to expand on something that Jennifer mentioned, which is the sample caching system. And I want to talk about something which I find really, really cool. This is a sample tube. Now, Jennifer told you that the sampling and caching system consists of a drill mounted out on the robotic arm and a system that processes the samples inside the rover. Well, this is one of the really key elements of this whole thing. This is a tube into which each individual sample will be drilled. It is a very complicated device. We often liken it to a test tube, but I think you can see it's got a lot of features that go beyond that simple description. And I want to tell you about some of them. First, one of the key technologies that had to be developed for this is how to make it extraordinarily clean. This is amongst the cleanest things that have ever been built, certainly is the cleanest thing that has ever been flown, in the sense that the inside of these tubes, of which there are 43 on board the rover that look just like this, inside of this tube has no microbes and is extremely clean of organic matter. And that's necessary so that when the cousins of this tube come back to Earth, we can be certain that what's inside that tube actually came from Mars and didn't come from Earth. There's several other features I can point out here. It's got a serial number on it. This will be very important for when the fetch mission goes to pick up this tube. We'll know which one it is and we'll know where we collected it. That's obviously super important. And you see lots of indentations and holes in the tube. This is necessary so that the robotic system, both on Perseverance and on the follow-on missions, can manipulate the tube. And finally, you also notice that it is bright white. This is not paint. Paint would contaminate the sample with organic matter. Instead, this is aluminum oxide, which has been flame sprayed onto the surface. And this is necessary so that when we cache the tube onto the surface, put it down on the surface for the future mission to pick up, it doesn't get too hot in the sun. The white reflects the heat away. So this is really one of the great features that has been built into the rover. And we spent a fair bit of time talking about the hardware of this mission, but I also want to point out that this takes a very large team of people to run. There are engineers who are responsible for commanding the rover and for ensuring its health and safety. And there's also a very large science team which will guide the operations in the pursuit of the science goals. The science team has about 350 members. They come from all around the world, and they range from students all the way through senior scientists. And they represent an enormous diversity of scientific disciplines, from people who are nitty-gritty experts about what each instrument does and how it does it, through to geologists and geochemists, atmospheric scientists, astrobiologists. And this whole team has to work together. One of the key things that Jennifer mentioned is that we have a very ambitious mission planned, and we need to work very efficiently. And one of the reasons for this is that the team each and every day will receive data from the rover, and on a very short time frame, the team needs to interpret that data. What questions did it answer? What new questions did it raise? And where do we go now? And what observations do we make? We have just a few hours to do that before we have to hand it back to the engineers, who then beam instructions up to the rover to go and do that. So this is a very time-pressured activity, and it is really important that the team know how to function together. And unlike a piece of hardware where you can design how all the elements interact, a human team is really quite different. And one of the things that we've been working on over the last few years since this team got together is a kind of bonding. And if I could have the next video clip. One of the things that some of us on the team were fortunate enough to be able to do is to go out into the field in a remote part of Western Australia to look at rocks that contain the oldest undisputed evidence of life on Earth, very similar to the kinds of things that we hope we might find on Mars. And so this was really a great activity so that we could all come together and really grasp the ideas behind this mission. We are now about 3 days away from the launch, and we will arrive, Perseverance will arrive on Mars in February of 2021. That gives us about 7 months in which the science team will not be relaxing. Instead, the science team is working to develop a plan for how we will investigate our landing site. If I can have the final clip. One of the things we've been doing is developing a notional traverse of how the rover will move through its landing site. So in blue, you see the landing ellipse, and in white, you see the traverse that the rover may take. And this shows that we have wonderful data from the orbiters that have been around Mars to guide us in the selection of key targets to further our science goals, and also the way we can traverse the rover through various hazards. So we're very excited to continue to work on that and then actually start executing as soon as we get to Mars early next year. And with that, I will turn it over to Tanya Bozak, who is a science team member and also an expert at looking for biosignatures in ancient terrestrial rocks.
Thank you, Ken. As someone who spends a lot of time thinking what life was like on Earth or Mars 3 billion years ago or more, I think that Jezreel Crater is an amazing site to examine and sample. The process by which we arrived to this landing site, to choose it, was long. It started in 2014 with the first landing site workshop, which was open to the entire community. So anyone could come and suggest their favorite landing site, and there were discussions, extensive discussions that led to the narrowing down of the number down to 3 sites in 2018. And then in November 2018, Dr. Thomas Zurbuchen made the final choice of Jezreel. And the choice is pretty obvious when you think about what we can see from space. That tells us a lot about Jezreel as a previously habitable environment. So if I can have the first slide, here is a photograph taken from space of the Jezreel Crater. This crater occurs in very old terrain. The crater itself is probably 3.8 billion years old. This is an amazingly old environment. And what we can see from this, the crater itself is about 50 kilometers wide. And in this dashed area, we see a fan. You see this fan already in Ken's slides. We know what forms these kinds of fan-like deposits on Earth, and those are deltas. Deltas occur when rivers flow through terrains and bring sediments into standing bodies of water. So just by looking at this picture, we can tell that there was a standing body of water that was there long enough for these sediments to be deposited and form these geomorphic features. So great, there was a standing body of water some time ago. What did it look like? So if I can have the movie that follows, this is an artist's rendition of a flyover many billion years ago over the crater. So if you can play the movie, we see on the left, there is the inflow channel that kept filling this crater with water. The water level was rising to the point when the outflow channel formed to the right. And that lasted for some time, long enough to create a delta. Now, we know a lot about deltas on Earth. And part of what makes deltaic environments so attractive is that they sample sediments from the surrounding regions. These very old regions would have been very old on Mars. So by looking at the sediments there, we can learn about the surrounding regions on Mars. However, for biosignatures, it's even more exciting because deltas are great at preserving organic matter and other types of biosignatures. And what we also know already from just orbital spectroscopy, if I can have the next slide, please, there are diverse minerals present in the delta and within our landing ellipse and the projected rover trajectory. So here's a false color image. These are not the real colors on Mars, unfortunately. It is not so colorful. But what these different colors show are areas in which different types of minerals are concentrated. So within the delta, you can see some purples, you can see some greens. Some of this tells us that there are a lot of clay minerals that are known on Earth to preserve good biosignatures. The green areas in particular, you can see this green that really follows the rim of the crater, but in the areas where the waters of the lake, former lake, would have been lapping the shore. And that is great for biosignatures if some of these minerals are precipitated. So here's where the ions would have come in and minerals with the inflowing water, and some of them may have been concentrated and perhaps even trapped some biosignatures. And good analogs on Earth, in fact, some of the oldest evidence for life on Earth comes from rocks that are of the similar composition to these green rocks. They're called carbonates. And if I can have the next slide, some of these rocks look like what follows. They are layered, they're made of carbonate. And so what we're looking here, we are back on Earth. This is a 2.7 billion year old rock, a stromatolite from Western Australia, the area we saw in Ken's video. And what we know about these rocks is how to look for biosignatures. So a lot of these little features you see here, different crinkly layers, different little bumps, we know when microbes have to be involved in the precipitation of minerals to make shapes like that. So are there stromatolites on Mars? We don't know. What are these carbonates on Mars? We don't know, but we are very excited to start looking at them. We certainly have a great suite of instruments to do so, and we have many sets of trained eyes that will be ready to sample the best rocks possible to bring to Earth and start asking these questions about possibly early life on Mars. So with that, I will turn it over to DC.
Thank you very much, Tanya. Understand we have some questions from the media on the phone. So first question goes to Chelsea Good of space.com. Chelsea?
Hi, thank you so much for taking my question. So, obviously a huge part of this mission, one of its main objectives, is to look for these biosignatures and evidence of this ancient life. I'm curious, in part, for people who are just like, oh, what does that mean? I think, obviously we know what biosignatures are, but what are you hoping to find, I guess, more concretely? We've seen organics on Mars, we've seen things of that nature, but I'm curious what specifically you're looking to see. And then, the second part to that question is, I'm curious how you think people will react if these findings, if these biosignatures do come to light and Perseverance is able to take us to the next level in the search for life.
Yeah, okay. So what are we looking for? What is a biosignature, and how are we going to look for it? Well, the first thing to understand is that what we are looking for is likely very primitive life. We are not looking for advanced life forms that might leave things like bones or fern fossils, something like that. We are looking, by analogy to what we find in the similar time on Earth, microbial life. And Tanya showed you an image of a very compelling example from Earth of what that looks like. It's produced where a layer of microbes lives at the interface between water and mud at the bottom of a body of water. So that's the kind of feature that we could see with our eyes. The example that she showed was macroscopic. It was quite large. And if you looked at it with a microscope, which we will be able to do with the instruments on the arm that I described, you can see that texture goes right down to the microscopic scale, and that we would see that there's organic matter in the terrestrial analogs that we would hope to see with the Sherlock instrument. So that's a really, that would be a very compelling example of a biosignature that we might hope to find.
And I'll just add a little bit towards the second half of that question, which is even beyond, just trying to reach just a little bit beyond what we hope to achieve with Perseverance. You've heard a lot about the incredible science that we hope to do at Mars in looking for biosignatures. But we also think there are other destinations within the solar system that could also be potential places where life may have started to take hold in the past, or may actually be present even today. The moons of Jupiter and Saturn, such as Europa, which is a moon of Jupiter, Titan and Enceladus, moons of Saturn, are also places where there potentially could be environments that might be conducive to life, other very interesting astrobiology targets. And so we're interested in continuing to explore all of these different environments, Mars and beyond, to continue our search for, are there other places in the solar system that might actually host life?
Great. Thank you, Lori. I understand the next question is from Marcia Dunn with AP. Marcia?
Yes, hello. I have a question for Jennifer Trosper, if I might. I hate to ask you to choose among your 5 rover children, but I'm wondering if Perseverance is your new favorite child. And also, what to you, you've worked with all 5 NASA rovers, what to you sets Perseverance apart the most from its predecessors? And you're free to use as many superlatives as you like. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I think I have to first say about the rovers the same thing I say about my 3 children. They're all my favorites. And I also have to be careful because I actually met my husband because of the Pathfinder rover, so I think I have to say that one's my favorite. But Perseverance is also my favorite, so I don't think I answered your question. But the thing that I really love about Perseverance, and I've had a different role, more of a visionary role on Perseverance than I had on previous rovers, so it is more, I think, a part of who I am and what I want rovers to be. And I see Perseverance as being transformative. right? And I think Matt talked about it this morning. We started exploring Mars with the orbiters, and then we got to where we had landers, and now we are driving around, and now this is transforming us to bringing samples back and eventually getting humans there. So I think that's the thing that makes Perseverance stand out uniquely amongst all of these rovers.
Great. Thank you, Jennifer. Next up, Mary Liz Bender with Inverse. Mary?
Yeah, thank you so much for taking my question. I was just curious if you could talk about what happens right after launch. What do the next steps, the next couple months look like for you, the team? And when will you take your first real fresh sigh of relief, if you will?
Jennifer, that one might be for you.
And that could go to anyone, but Lori, perhaps you want to answer that question?
Oh, sure. Well, I'll leave some of the details of exactly what's going to be happening over the next few months, maybe to Ken and to Jennifer. But when will we heave a sigh of relief? I think after we've successfully completed the entry, descent, and landing, and gotten through that 7 minutes of terror, I think all of us will be very relieved and ready to begin the hard work of conducting the surface science and starting to see the incredible results of the fruits of our labor here. But I'm gonna let Ken or Jennifer talk about what we're going to be doing over the next few months.
Well, I'll just say what the science team is going to be doing: training, training, training. It's a very complicated piece of hardware, and the scientists on this mission, most of them have very little preparation to do this kind of work. We have to understand what the instruments are capable of and how to instruct them to do what we want them to do. So training is really essential at this point.
Jennifer, anything to add from JPL?
Yeah, I'll add that we have a cruise team that is actually flying the vehicle to Mars. So shortly after launch, we'll actually be able to see the sun on our solar arrays and our sun sensors. We'll be able to find the stars in the sky with our star scanner, and we'll get our attitude initialized. We'll get to the right spin rate. And then within a few weeks, we'll do our first trajectory correction maneuver, which essentially just gets us on the home and transfer trajectory that we're taking to Mars and corrects for any launch vehicle errors.
Great. Thank you very much, Jennifer. Next up from Irish Television, Leo Enright. Leo?
Thanks very much, DC. For Ken Farley, I rather loved the dotted lines on the traverse map that you showed. Could you talk a little bit about the extended mission? I mean, we're all hoping you'd go beyond Midway, but it looks like at the moment you're only prepared to go as far as Midway, or am I reading that map right?
Yeah, let me provide some background here. During the landing site selection process, the community that was doing the prioritization recognized that Jezreel Crater had some really fantastic targets, and Tanya talked about them: the delta, the carbonate rock. Very excited to see those. But there was also a great deal of excitement to rove up the crater rim and explore the highlands beyond, which is includes some of the oldest rocks on Mars, some very unusual features that could potentially indicate the interaction of hot water with rock, another habitable environment that we would be very excited to investigate. But it's important to recognize that we have a prime mission that, as Jennifer mentioned, is 1 Mars year, and so that traverse indicates where we hope to get by the end of the prime mission, about 2 Earth years after we land.
Great. Okay. Next up is Natalie Guerrero. Natalie?
Yeah, I wanted to know, what is the process for choosing what samples you end up taking, because it sounds like there's a limited number of sample tubes.
I can take that one. We have 43 sample tubes, and we expect that over the entire duration of the mission, not within the prime mission, that we will use all of these tubes in the pursuit of something like 30 or 35 really good samples. The additional tubes are there so that we can, for example, change our minds. We might say, oh, this looks like a good example of some particular kind of rock, and then 6 months later we find something that's much better. So we have an ability to kind of change our mind in thinking about what samples come back. It's important to understand that one of the central goals of the mission is to seek the signs of life. And many of the samples that we collect will be specifically chosen because they represent habitable environments, or if we are fortunate, also have potential biosignatures in them that we wish to investigate further. But there are also many other kinds of questions. We heard earlier about how Mars climate changed. It changed enormously. And an important thing to understand is that we have no idea why Mars was so different in its early history. And we hope that if we bring back rocks and study them in terrestrial laboratories, they'll tell us something about that. So I guess the idea is that we have a broad set of scientific objectives that we believe the samples can and will be used for. And the key really is diversity. We will collect a diversity of samples. This reflects not only our understanding of what questions are likely to be answered, but also recognizing that decades from now, there will be many other kinds of questions that we can't presently foresee. So having a diverse sample suite is the best way to approach that collection of the cache.
Great. Thank you, Ken. And we have some questions from social media. The first one is from Tor, and he is in the UK. And he's been building his own Lego and Connects rover for a month and waiting for the launch of Mars 2020. So he would like to know, and perhaps Tanya, this might be a good one for you, how can you fit an entire science laboratory into a rover?
So part of what makes this particular rover so special is that we don't have to fit an entire science laboratory in this rover. For example, as Ken mentioned, the biosignatures we can look for will probably be something microscopic. And there's just no way to bring a microscope, a real microscope that we would use on Earth, to the surface of Mars. So this special rover and its special sampling and caching equipment is designed to store the samples, and eventually these samples will come to Earth, and then we can study them in laboratories on Earth. That said, there's a suite of instruments, that Ken mentioned. So there's Watson, there's Sherlock, there are all these instruments that can allow us to look at some rock textures and look for some organic material. So we can know a lot even just by looking at rocks on Mars.
Thank you, Tanya. Next question, this might be a good one for Farah. Farah, since you're about mobility, this is a question about keeping camera lenses clear of debris and dirt. How do you do that with the nav cameras that are going to be supporting the drives?
So on landing, the cameras are covered with camera covers, which protects the cameras from that dust. So we've tried to keep the cameras as clean as we can right now, and then after the landing sequence, we'll fire some pyros to get rid of those camera covers, and that should give us really clear vision on Mars. Other than that, typically we don't tend to get too much sand accumulating on the cameras that are up on the turret, so we don't worry too much about that. And we also benefit sometimes from the winds that serve as cleaning events for any dust that might get up there.
Great. Thank you, Farah. The next question is from Brittany Wright. And Brittany Wright writes, I'd love to know what the expected lifespan of Perseverance is and how you go about making repairs to it if anything should break or malfunction. Maybe that's a good one for Jennifer.
Yeah, we have tested and qualified our hardware to 1.5 Mars years. So that's longer than the 1 Mars year or the 2 Earth years that the mission is supposed to last. The way that we do that, we actually take it through all the thermal cycles. The thermal cycles on Mars are the hardest parts about the hardware that could break the hardware. And so we do that, and we make sure that it will last through all those thermal cycles. And we make sure that our mechanisms will move as many revs as we need them to. So we've done that. We expect this to last 1 Mars year. Now, the question about what do we do if things go wrong is an interesting one, because having operated all of these Mars rovers, there's all kinds of things that just go wrong, and it's far away, and sometimes it doesn't talk to you, and that's the first problem you notice. So there are a lot of different methods, and a lot of them are in our design, really. And I'll just talk to a couple of them. The first one is that we have redundancy in our critical hardware. So if the flight computer goes bad, we have another flight computer that can replace it. We also have something called functional redundancy, where we have, for example, we can talk directly to the rover from Earth via uplink and sending it commands, but we can also send those commands through orbiters if for some reason we lose the link to the rover from direct to Earth. So we have those types of things. It's always harrowing when you don't hear from the rover. Some great stories about getting these rovers out of difficult situations, but the team of operations personnel are very well experienced and suited to help the rover whenever it has some problems.
Great. Thank you, Jennifer. And actually, one more question for you, and this one's from Michael Jackal, and he writes, what is the hardest part about building the rover?
Well, Perseverance is a very complicated rover. I think I showed you different pieces of it during my presentation. The hardest part of this rover, there are many parts that are hard, but the sampling and caching system is a robotically complex system. You have to hand samples back and forth between different robot arms through a bit carousel. And then on top of that, it has to be super clean so that whatever you discover is not something that you took with you because it wasn't clean enough when you launched it. So that has been the hardest thing to develop on the Perseverance rover. And it's really, I think, a real testament that the team has been able to get that to the point where we can collect these samples and launch in the 2020 launch window.
Great. Thank you, Jennifer. Well, we're coming up at the top of the hour soon, so it's probably a good time to wrap the show. A reminder that tomorrow we have 2 more briefings about the Mars 2020 Perseverance rover mission. The first one's at 2 p.m. Eastern, and that's on sample return. That should be a real good one. And then 2 hours later at 4 p.m. Eastern, we have one on Mars 2020 mission tech and humans to Mars. So those are 2 good media briefings tomorrow. A reminder, of course, that July 30th is the opening of our launch period, and commentary will start on July 30th at 7 a.m. and 7:50 a.m. is the first opportunity for launch that day. Don't forget to follow the mission on social media at NASA Persevere on Twitter and Facebook, and please feel free to join the conversation using the hashtag #CountdownToMars. So that's it from here at KSC Press Site. I'm DC Agel. You guys have a good evening. Thank you.